some questions, but I was hoping we could start with maybe some common ground. We heard some pretty disturbing testimony here from our witnesses about discrimination that kids are facing at schools in California, where they are segregated from their peers, where they're not allowed to participate in activities, they're told they can't go to prom, they can't walk the stage. Can we at least agree that this sort of discrimination and mistreatment of kids is wrong?
I think that schools and other public settings absolutely have the ability to try to protect public health, and if they make that decision about a vaccine requirement, that's their determination to make.
So you don't think that's wrong to tell a child they can't go to prom or graduate?
I think that it is that schools have the ability and the responsibility to protect the health of their school communities, and they'll make that determination.
So you have no opinion on the matter one way or another?
I've answered your question, Assemblymember.
What about what we heard about these inducements to get the vaccine? Raffles or gift cards, pizza, whatever the case may be. Can we agree that that's wrong?
What I will say is that anyone who is licensed and authorized to vaccinate anyone, whether an adult or a child, has to obtain informed consent to do that. And if they've not obtained informed consent, they're not permitted, and it's frankly unethical for them to provide any health care to someone who has not provided informed consent. And so that applies in any setting.
Right, but so can we agree that these inducements like pizza and gift cards, that shouldn't be happening?
I've answered your question, Assemblymember.
I don't think you have.
Yeah, I think I have, actually.
All right.
You're implying that people are being somehow tricked or coerced, and what I'm saying is that any healthcare provider has a professional responsibility to obtain informed consent, and if they do not obtain informed consent, they can be disciplined. And that is true for all healthcare, for anyone, no matter what their age is, they have that responsibility.
Okay. Well, before moving on to my next question, I want to say, since you won't say it, to any school officials out there who are doing these sort of things, who are discriminating against kids, who are mistreating kids, who are depriving them of important formative experiences, that is absolutely wrong, it is un-American, and it needs to stop. Now, you brought a couple students to testify here today, and thank you to the students for your testimony as well as those on the other side. You have brought two 17-year-old students. So can I ask, why did you decide 12-year-olds is the right cutoff for this bill?
So as I mentioned at the beginning, Assemblymember, and as is outlined in the very thorough analysis, there is an existing structure of law in California, longstanding, authorizing 12-year-olds and up to consent to a fairly wide array of healthcare services. So we are building on that existing structure of 12 to 17 for various vaccines and other forms of healthcare that I described at the beginning.
Do you know how many other states allow 12-year-olds to get vaccinations without parental consent?
Well, it's listed, I think, in the analysis. There are different states that have laws allowing for vaccination and other healthcare ranging from 11 to 16. Different states, some are 14, 15, 11, 16. It varies by state, and in California, the 12 years old is a very common age of consent in California for various forms of health care.
So my understanding is there are two other states that allow 12 and up. Does that sound right to you?
I don't have that list right in front of me, but there are other states that allow various ages in terms of when a teenager can consent, ranging from 11 to 16.
Okay, well, the facts as I understand them is it's two other states. So California would be the third. You mentioned that we have this existing, structure in California law, but the precedent from the California Supreme Court is that the requirement that medical care be provided to a minor only with the consent of the minor's parents or guardian remains the general rule, both in California and throughout the United States. So, I guess, do you agree that's the precedent, and do you agree with the general rule that there should be parental consent for medical decisions?
I think, well, just to be clear, we want parents to be involved in many decisions that their kids make, including healthcare decisions. Of course we want that, and in, I think, probably a large majority of cases, even if kids have the ability to go and get vaccinated on their own, they will probably go and talk to their parents about it. And we know that for many, many parents and families, that's the case. They have open communications, there's a supportive environment. But unfortunately, we also know that there are situations, there are families where teenagers do not feel, they do not feel that they have the ability or they do not feel safe talking to their parents about these issues, whether it's because of divergent views and viewpoints, whether it is because of medical neglect. The parents maybe have no issue with vaccinations, but there's medical neglect, or for whatever reason, the kids do not feel that they can talk to their parents. And that, I don't think, is a majority, but those family situations exist. It's tragic, but that's reality. And so those kids should have the ability to protect their own health.
Right, but the question was that the general rule is that for most medical decisions, parental consent is required.
That is the rule for most healthcare decisions in
Right.
California, but for quite a few, the age of consent is 12.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to kind of understand where you're coming from with this. So I really am trying to understand your side of the argument. So do you agree, though, that for most medical decisions, it is appropriate to require parental consent?
I think for most medical decisions, the law is 18. I think for some medical decisions, it is appropriate for it to be younger. We know that, as outlined in the analysis, for example, in Oregon, there's a much broader array of healthcare services that teenagers are able to consent to on their own. But in California, for most healthcare services, it is 18, but for some, we have chosen to go down to 12.
And you think vaccination should be one of those?
I do.
Clearly.
I would not have introduced this bill if I didn't think that.
So do you think that every child should receive every available vaccination?
I'm sorry, can you say that
Do you
again?
think every child should receive every available vaccination?
I do believe in childhood vaccinations. I believe in the vaccinations in terms of requirements for school children. And I do believe that teenagers 12 and up should have the ability to get a vaccine on their own. That's what I believe.
Right, but the question was, do you think that every child should receive every available vaccine, including the COVID vaccine?
I think that every kid should have the ability to get vaccinated, absolutely. And I do believe in California law that requires certain vaccines be obtained in order to attend school.
Okay, so you didn't answer yes. So clearly, it's not the case that necessarily every child should receive every vaccine or that every child should receive the COVID vaccine. So there is a judgment to be made in individual cases. And so the question is, who is best positioned to make that judgment? The child or the parent? Why do you think it's the 12-year-old as opposed to the parent who's best positioned to make that judgment?
So as I mentioned before, we do want, I want, and I'm sure we agree on this, that in an ideal situation, the parent would be involved in that determination, absolutely. But there are kids who, for whatever reason, they can't communicate with their parents, they have a dysfunctional or an abusive relationship, they're scared to talk to their parents about these issues because the parent has very strong anti-vaccine views. They just are not able, or they're frankly at times scared to talk to their parents about it. And in those situations, those kids should have the ability to protect their own health. We had all but eradicated measles in this country. Measles are back because there are parents who refuse to vaccinate their kids. And if a teenager wants to get vaccinated for measles, say the parents has homeschooled the kid and not gotten them the polio or measles vaccine, they should be able to do so. And that's why we brought this bill. So yes, we want parents to be involved, but there are situations where it's just not going to work and it's not working out that way. And in that situation, a teenager should be able to make that decision to protect their own health.
So let's assume for the sake of argument that this is true, that there are some situations like that. The problem is you're not creating a law just for those situations. You're creating a general law that's applicable to everyone. So the question we have to ask as policymakers is that as a general matter, is it the parent or the child who is in the best position to make this decision? So for example, do you think it's the parent or the child who has the best understanding of that child's medical history?
Honestly, it depends. We know that there are parents who may know every single word in their child's medical record. There are other parents who may not know very much at all. We know that for us as adults, we may not remember every single aspect of what vaccine or treatment we got 30 years ago. And so to suggest that it's only teens who may not know every inch of their record it's just not accurate. So again, we want parents to be involved. That is the ideal situation, and I agree with that. But that is not always feasible given the circumstances that kids find themselves in.
So I don't disagree. You're absolutely right. There's, of course, a million different situations and variations, but again, you're creating a general law. So the question we have to ask as policymakers is that, generally speaking, is it the parent or the child who has the best understanding of the child's medical history?
I think that teenagers are absolutely able to make that decision for themselves to get vaccinated. They absolutely can.
So your bill has generated quite a bit of opposition, clearly, including from your Democrat colleagues in the Senate. It passed out of the Senate with just 21 votes. 10 of them would not support it. So you must believe that there is a pretty strong public health benefit to this legislation, I presume. And so, but I didn't really hear any evidence of that in the testimony. I mean, for that to be true, you'd have to establish two things, right? You have to establish, A, that this bill would lead to at least a marginal increase in the adolescent vaccination rate for COVID, and that, B, a marginal increase in the adolescent vaccination rate would reduce in a meaningful way the incidence of severe disease from COVID, which, I didn't hear any evidence to support either premise, and both seem kind of a stretch, given that the incidence of severe disease for kids from COVID is really so small that it doesn't really show up in the data. That's especially true from the strains that are dominant now, and it's especially true given that the CDC now says that 75% of kids have already had COVID. So, can you just tell me concisely, where is the evidence that this bill will have a positive impact on public health?
Well, first of all, this bill is not just about the COVID vaccine, right? It's about any vaccine with FDA approval and CDC recommendation for this age group. So it's not just about the COVID
But it's
vaccine.
clearly motivated.
No, this is about any vaccine that's appropriate for teenagers. And we know that, for example, I talked about measles. It can be very dangerous, measles. How about mumps that can cause sterility, someone to be sterilized, not be able to procreate in the future. And we have kids who are not vaccinated against mumps because their parents are opposed to vaccination and have taken their kids out of school. Those kids should be able to get that vaccine to protect their health. So it's not just about COVID. And you heard I know you were here, thank you for being here and listening as always, that you heard the testimony from the doctor that there are kids who do get severely ill from COVID, who do get hospitalized and do die. But it's not just about the COVID vaccine. And I'll be honest with you, we know that what they call wild polio is still present in the world. And it started to come back in new countries like Ukraine. And I am really worried about what would happen if we saw polio come back in this country because of the growing misinformation-fueled anti-vaccine movement. And that's one of the causes. We know what polio causes. So it's not just about the COVID vaccine.
Okay, but so putting all that aside, which is kind of new things being brought into the conversation.
It's not new,
it's not
new at all, Assemblymember.
We've heard much evidence presented at all that when it comes to COVID, there's going to be a positive impact on public health.
We heard from the doctor, Dr. Bloomberg, who talked about that specifically. Again, this is not a mandate that these teens receive the vaccine. It is giving them the option of protecting their own health, and we know that it will help protect their health.
So my understanding is that it's not just physicians and even nurse practitioners who are currently authorized to administer the COVID vaccine. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it's a whole host of professionals that have been authorized under one of the emergency orders, I believe it was, to administer the vaccine. Does that at all bring any additional concerns for you?
Well, California has a whole structure with different professionals ranging, whether it's a pharmacist or a physician or others, who are authorized to provide vaccines. Any professional who's authorized to provide vaccines has received training on administering the vaccines and has certain professional and licensing responsibilities. I've been a supporter. I don't recall your voting record. I'm going to speculate you and I are probably at least partially aligned on this, that healthcare professionals should be allowed to practice to the scope of their training. And this legislature has taken action to do that, understanding that these folks are trained and have licensure responsibilities and ethical responsibilities.
Okay, I mean, we're talking about students of medical, pharmacy, dental, registered nursing, vocational nursing, midwives, physician assistants, respiratory care practitioners, podiatry, optometry, veterinary. So there's a lot of folks who are authorized to administer the vaccine now, who would now apparently be authorized to give it to kids without parental consent. Is that right?
Well, that is part of the emergency order. That is not the typical longstanding California law. But that was the emergency order because when you're in the middle of a global pandemic where I think we're now over 1 million Americans have died from COVID-19, then you take emergency steps that are temporary in nature.
Sure. And the FDA authorization right now, it's still just emergency use authorization for 12 to 15.
That's correct for now. Yeah.
For now. And so is the intent of your bill to still allow kids in that age bracket to get the COVID vaccination without parental consent?
Yeah, the bill does cover emergency use authorization. California law has not distinguished with respect to vaccinations or other treatment between approval and emergency use authorization.
Okay, so that is the intent of your bill.
That is.
It is, okay. Are you at all concerned that some of the places that currently offer, vaccination for kids or for all ages may actually no longer choose to do so because of some of the issues that may come up related to liability or other concerns if this bill goes into law?
No, I'm not. I mean, any different sites can make whatever decisions that are appropriate for them to make, but no, I'm not. I don't think that will happen.
Okay. And we had a decision out of D.C. That was for a similar proposal over there that got struck down. There's federal preemption issues, there are constitutional issues.
Yeah.
Do you see this going to court if it passes?
Oh, do I see it going to court, or do I think that the court challenge would have any merit?
Either.
Those are different questions.
Sure.
People are entitled to file lawsuits and go to court, and we've already heard indication that some people may want to go to court, and they have every right to do that. I don't think that their legal arguments are strong at all. I think the analysis does a superb job debunking those legal arguments. In the D.C. case in particular, it was one trial level judge in D.C. Making a decision that, frankly, when I looked at that decision, and I think it got it wrong. And I don't see that as, not only is it not binding here, but it's not persuasive at all. There is no preemption. I think the analysis does a good job debunking that argument. And the idea that it would be unconstitutional for a state to lower the age of consent for health care below 18, that is just not the case. And we know that states have had the ability to determine the age of consent for health care for forever, and they've done so, and many states have done so, not just in the vaccine context, but other contexts. So that ruling is just not persuasive at all.
Okay. All right, well, I appreciate you answering my question, Senator, and I want to thank everyone who has called in and is here to participate. I'll be blunt. I think you should withdraw your bill. It barely got out of the Senate with just 21 votes. 10 of your own Democratic colleagues did not support it, and I do not think it's going to get out of the Assembly. It'll get out of this committee because this committee passes everything. But I don't think it's going to get out of the Assembly. It's a fight we don't need to have. This is not a bill anyone is asking for. So I think we need to just move on. I'd encourage you to withdraw the bill, and let's focus on the issues that are many of them that are actually affecting our state.